The rain started falling the moment Eliza Monroe stepped off the stagecoach in Cheyenne, Wyoming, to forward in Soysher, Wyoming territory, and she wondered if God himself was trying to wash away the shame that clung to her like a second skin. It was June of 1878, and the frontier town sprawled before her in a mess of muddy streets and wooden buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support, much like she had been doing with her own crumbling life back in Philadelphia. The storm had swept in from the plains with a fury that matched the turmoil in her heart, and as she stood there with her 2 worn carpet bags and a trunk that contained everything she owned, Eliza felt the cold rain soak through her traveling dress and wondered what madness had driven her to flee 2,000 miles west to a place where she knew not a single soul. She had answered an advertisement for a school teacher, a position that promised respectable employment in a growing community, but the reality of Cheyenne was far rougher than the elegant script of that newspaper notice had suggested. The streets were ankle-deep in mud, and the buildings that lined them were mostly saloons, gambling halls, and establishments whose purposes she could only guess at, with a mixture of innocence and dread. A group of cowboys rode past, their horses splashing through puddles, and one of them tipped his hat to her with a grin that suggested he found her predicament amusing. Eliza clutched her bags tighter and looked around for someone, anyone, who might direct her to the boarding house mentioned in the letter from the town council. The rain was coming down harder now, and she could smell the rich scent of wet earth mixing with something else, something sharp and clean that cut through the usual frontier odors of horse manure and wood smoke, cedar. Somewhere nearby there must have been cedar trees or perhaps a building constructed of that fragrant wood, and the combination of cedar and rain created a perfume that was both foreign and somehow comforting. "You look lost, miss," a voice said behind her, and Eliza spun around so quickly that she nearly dropped one of her bags. The man who had spoken was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his canvas duster in a way that suggested hard physical labor, and a body built for the demands of frontier life. He wore typical cowboy attire beneath the duster, denim trousers, a chambray shirt that had seen better days, and a leather vest that was scarred and worn. His hat was pulled low against the rain, but she could see his face clearly enough, angular and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of beard, and eyes that were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight, amber and warm despite the cold rain. "I am," Eliza admitted, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "I am looking for Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. I was told it was near the center of town, but I confess I have no idea which direction that might be." The cowboy picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing at all, hoisting it onto his shoulder with an ease that made her aware of just how much stronger men out here must be than the soft merchants and clerks she had known back east. "I will take you there," he said simply. "It is only 3 streets over. You cannot make it on foot with all this, not in this mud." She wanted to protest, to insist that she could manage on her own, but the truth was she could not, and pride seemed a foolish thing to cling to when she was already soaked through and shivering. "Thank you," she said instead. "That is very kind." He led her to a wagon hitched nearby, a sturdy vehicle with a canvas cover that would at least provide some shelter from the rain. The cowboy helped her up onto the seat with a courtesy that surprised her, given his rough appearance, and then climbed up beside her with an agility that spoke of long practice. The wagon lurched forward, and Eliza found herself acutely aware of the man beside her, of the way he handled the reins with confident, capable hands, of the breadth of his shoulders, and of that smell, cedar and rain, that seemed to cling to him like it was part of his very being. "You must be the new school teacher," he said after a moment, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried over the sound of rain drumming on the canvas above them. "The whole town has been talking about you for weeks. We have not had a proper school here since last winter when Miss Abernathy married and moved to Denver." "I am Eliza Monroe," she said, folding her hands in her lap in an attempt to appear composed despite her sodden state. "And yes, I am to teach the children here, assuming the position is still available and I have not arrived too late." "James Holloway," he replied, glancing at her with those amber eyes. "Most folks call me Hollis, and the position is yours, no question. The council would not dare turn you away after you came all this way. They are desperate for someone with learning to teach the young ones. There was something in his voice when he said the word learning that made her think he placed great value on education, and she found herself studying him more closely, trying to reconcile his rough exterior with what seemed to be a thoughtful mind beneath. "Have you lived in Cheyenne long, Mr. Holloway?" "Long enough," he said, guiding the wagon around a particularly deep puddle. "Came here in '73, when the town was even wilder than it is now. I run cattle on a spread about 10 miles north of here along the creek. Come into town every week or so for supplies and to see that civilization has not completely abandoned this place." They rode in silence for a few moments, and Eliza found herself oddly comfortable despite the circumstances. There was something solid and reassuring about James Holloway, something that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. When they pulled up in front of a 2-story wooden building with a painted sign that read Henderson's Boarding House, she felt an unexpected reluctance to leave the shelter of the wagon in his presence. He helped her down again, his hands strong and steady at her waist, and she caught that scent again, cedar and rain, so vivid it almost made her dizzy. Their eyes met for just a moment, and something passed between them, some wordless recognition that made her breath catch in her throat. Then he was lifting her trunk down, carrying it to the porch, and the moment was gone, leaving her wondering if she had imagined it. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a stout, cheerful woman in her 50s who clucked over Eliza's sodden state and immediately ushered her inside to a room with a fire already burning in the hearth. James Holloway stood in the doorway, hat in hand, water dripping from his duster onto the polished floorboards. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," Eliza said, meaning it more than he could possibly know. "I do not know what I would have done without your assistance." He nodded once, settling his hat back on his head. "Welcome to Cheyenne, Miss Monroe. I expect I will see you around town." Then he was gone, his boots thudding on the porch steps, and Eliza stood by the window watching as he climbed back onto the wagon and drove off into the rain. Mrs. Henderson bustled about, bringing hot water for washing and a towel for drying, chattering about the town and the people and the school. But Eliza heard only half of it. Her mind was still full of amber eyes and the scent of cedar and rain. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Eliza settled into her new life in Cheyenne. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building at the edge of town, with rough wooden benches, a pot-bellied stove, and a precious few books that had been donated by various families. She had 18 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, children of shopkeepers and ranchers and railroad workers, all hungry for the learning that she could provide. They were rowdy and undisciplined at first, testing her boundaries, but Eliza had not come 2,000 miles to be defeated by a classroom of frontier children. She was firm but fair, and by the end of the first week she had won their respect, if not yet their affection. She saw James Holloway twice during those weeks, both times from a distance. Once, he was loading supplies into his wagon outside the general store, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and she had hurried past with her eyes averted, afraid he would see the color rising in her cheeks. The second time, he was on horseback, riding down the main street with 2 other men, and he had touched the brim of his hat to her in greeting. She had nodded back, heart hammering foolishly in her chest, and spent the rest of the afternoon scolding herself for behaving like a silly schoolgirl with a crush, because that was ridiculous. She was 24 years old, a grown woman who had left Philadelphia specifically to escape the complications of romance and the heartbreak that came with trusting the wrong man. She had no business thinking about James Holloway's amber eyes or the way his hands had felt at her waist or that intoxicating scent of cedar and rain. She was here to teach, to build a new life for herself, to prove that she could be independent and self-sufficient. Romance was the last thing she needed. But late at night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, she found herself remembering anyway. It was a Saturday in early July when she saw him again up close. The town was holding a social gathering in the community hall, a dance and supper meant to raise funds for improvements to the school, and Mrs. Henderson had insisted that Eliza attend. "You cannot hide away like a hermit," the older woman had said firmly. "The people here need to get to know you, and you need to feel part of the community. Besides, it will do you good to have some fun. You work too hard, always with your nose in a book or grading papers." So Eliza had put on her best dress, a gown of deep blue silk that she had not worn since leaving Philadelphia, and allowed Mrs. Henderson to arrange her dark hair in a more elaborate style than her usual simple bun. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman who looked younger than her years, with clear gray eyes and a heart-shaped face that was pretty enough, if not beautiful. The dress fit well, emphasizing a slender waist and curves that were modest but feminine, and she felt a flutter of something that might have been anticipation as she and Mrs. Henderson made their way to the hall. The community hall was packed with people, the air thick with the smells of food and perfume and tobacco smoke. A small group of musicians was playing fiddle and guitar in one corner, and several couples were already dancing while others stood talking in groups or helping themselves to the potluck supper spread across long tables. Eliza recognized many of her students' parents and was soon caught up in a series of conversations about curriculum and reading materials and whether it might be possible to extend the school year. She was standing near the refreshment table, sipping weak punch and listening to Mrs. Yates talk about her son's progress in arithmetic when she felt someone watching her. She turned her head and found James Holloway standing on the other side of the room, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget what Mrs. Yates was saying. He was dressed more formally than she had seen him before, in dark trousers and a white shirt with a black vest, his hair neatly combed and his jaw freshly shaved. He looked like a different man, more refined, but there was still that same solid, capable air about him that had struck her on the day they met. He crossed the room toward her, and Eliza felt her pulse quicken. Mrs. Yates noticed the direction of her gaze and smiled knowingly. "That James Holloway is a good man," she said in a low voice. "Steady and hardworking, not like some of these wild cowboys who spend all their pay on whiskey and gambling. He has built up a fine ranch, all on his own. Any woman would be lucky to catch his eye." Before Eliza could respond to that startling statement, James was standing in front of her, hat in hand, looking almost nervous. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice that same low rumble she remembered, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" She knew she should decline. She barely knew this man, and she had not come to Cheyenne looking for romance. But there was something in his eyes, something hopeful and sincere, that made it impossible to refuse. "I would be pleased to, Mr. Holloway," she heard herself say. He led her onto the makeshift dance floor, and when he took her hand in his and placed his other hand at her waist, she felt that same jolt of recognition she had experienced the day they met. The fiddle was playing a waltz, and he guided her through the steps with surprising grace for such a large man. They were both silent for a few moments, and Eliza was acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his hand through the thin silk of her dress, of the way he smelled, cedar and rain, even now, even inside this crowded hall. "You are settling in well?" he asked finally, looking down at her with those amber eyes. "I am," she said. "The children are wonderful, even the difficult ones, and the town has been very welcoming." "I am glad to hear it." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I wanted to check on you before now, to see that you had everything you needed, but I did not want to presume. I know some women find frontier men too forward." There was something endearing about his hesitation, and Eliza found herself smiling up at him. "I would not have found it forward, Mr. Holloway. You were very kind to me on the day I arrived, and I have not forgotten it." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "That day," he said slowly, as if choosing his words with care, "when I first saw you standing there in the rain, you smelled like cedar and rain. I know that sounds strange, but it struck me so powerfully. I've never been able to get it out of my mind. Cedar and rain. Every time I smell either one now, I think of you." Eliza's breath caught. There was such raw honesty in his words, such vulnerability. that she felt her careful defenses beginning to crumble. "I thought it was you," she whispered. "The cedar. I thought that scent was coming from you." "My ranch," he said. "It is built among cedar trees, stands of them all along the creek. I work with that wood every day, cutting fence posts, building corrals. It gets into everything, my clothes, my skin. I suppose I carry it with me wherever I go, but you—" He paused, and she saw something fierce and tender in his expression. "You smelled like rain and something else, something sweet and clean, and I have never recovered from it. From either. From cedar or rain, because both remind me of you now." They had stopped dancing, though the music continued around them. Other couples swirled past, but Eliza was aware only of James, of his words, of the way he was looking at her as if she were something precious and rare. She should step back, should put distance between them, should remember all the reasons she had come west alone. But her feet would not move, and her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "I do not know what to say," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not have to say anything," he replied. "I just wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest with you. I am not a man who plays games or speaks pretty words I do not mean. If I am too bold, I apologize, but out here life is too short and too hard to waste time on anything but the truth." The music ended, and the spell was broken by the sound of applause and the calls for the next dance. James stepped back, releasing her hand reluctantly, and Eliza felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Monroe," he said formally, but his eyes were saying something else entirely. "Eliza," she said impulsively. "Please, call me Eliza." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it, making him almost handsome. "Eliza," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "And you should call me Hollis. All my friends do." "Hollis," she said, and liked the way it sounded. He left her then, disappearing into the crowd, and Eliza stood there feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her elbow, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well," the older woman said, "that looked promising. James Holloway is a good man, Eliza. One of the best. You could do far worse out here." Eliza did not trust herself to respond. She had fled Philadelphia to escape a man who had seemed good at first, who had courted her with poetry and promises, only to reveal himself as a liar and a cheat who had nearly destroyed her reputation. She had sworn then that she would never again trust her heart to anyone, that independence was worth more than any romance, but James Holloway did not seem like that man at all. There was nothing false or calculating about him, nothing but an almost painful honesty that called to something deep inside her. She spent the rest of the evening in a daze, dancing with other men but remembering only the feel of James's hand at her waist, listening to other conversations but hearing only his words. "You smelled like cedar and rain when we met, and I have never recovered from either." It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, and it terrified her how much she wanted to believe in it. The following week, James began courting her in earnest. He came to town on Wednesday with a bouquet of wildflowers that he had clearly picked himself, the stems wrapped in a bit of calico cloth. He stood on Mrs. Henderson's porch, hat in hand, and asked if she might care to take a walk with him. Eliza, who had been grading papers and trying not to think about him, found herself saying yes before she had time to consider the wisdom of it. They walked through the town and out onto the prairie beyond, where the grass stretched endlessly toward distant mountains, and the sky was so vast it made her feel small and infinite all at once. James talked about his ranch, about the challenges of running cattle in country that could be brutally hot in summer and deadly cold in winter, about his dreams of building something lasting. Eliza found herself telling him about Philadelphia, about her work there as a governess, about her love of books and learning. She did not tell him about the man who had hurt her, not yet, but she sensed that James knew there was something in her past that had driven her west, and he did not press her for details. "Why did you come to Cheyenne?" she asked him as they stood looking out over the prairie. "You said you arrived in '73. What brought you here?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I was running from something too," he said finally. "Or maybe running toward something. I grew up in Missouri, worked on my father's farm until the war came. I was just a boy then, only 15 when it started, but I lied about my age and joined up. Saw things no one should have to see, did things I am not proud of. When it was over, I could not go back to Missouri, could not pretend that life could just continue as before, so I came west looking for a fresh start, found it here." She reached out without thinking and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and they stood like that for a long time. Two people who had come to the frontier seeking redemption and found instead the possibility of something more. After that, they saw each other as often as James's work allowed. He came to town every few days, always with some excuse: supplies he needed, business with the bank, a horse that needed shoeing, but everyone in Cheyenne knew he was really coming to see the school teacher. They took walks together, attended church socials, sat on Mrs. Henderson's porch in the evenings, and talked until the stars came out. Eliza felt herself falling for him despite her best efforts to maintain her independence, felt her heart opening in ways she had thought impossible after Philadelphia. James was patient with her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but she could see the depth of his feelings in the way he looked at her, in the care he took with her, in the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. And she knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her that she was falling in love with him too. It was late August when everything changed. Eliza was at the schoolhouse one afternoon preparing lessons for the next day when one of her students, a 10-year-old boy named Tommy Garrett, came running in with panic written all over his face. "Miss Monroe," he gasped, "you have to come quick. There has been an accident at the livery stable. A man got kicked by a horse and they say he is hurt bad." Eliza's first thought was of James, and her blood ran cold. "Who?" she demanded, already gathering her skirts to run. "Who was hurt?" "That rancher, Holloway," Tommy said, and Eliza felt the world tilt. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, her heart pounding with fear, her mind filled with prayers she had not said since childhood. The livery stable was at the far end of town, and by the time she reached it, a crowd had gathered. She pushed through them, not caring about propriety or what anyone might think, and found James lying on the ground with blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. His eyes were closed, and he was terrifyingly still. "Hollis," she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "Hollis, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, and despite the pain she could see in them, he managed a weak smile. "Eliza," he murmured, "you came?" "Of course I came, you foolish man," she said, her hands trembling as she examined the wound. It was deep but not life-threatening, she thought, though he had lost a good deal of blood. "What happened?" "Mare spooked," he said, his voice rough. "Kicked out. My own fault for standing too close." He tried to sit up and winced. "I am fine, just a knock on the head." "You are not fine," she said fiercely. "You need a doctor. Someone get Dr. Bradley," she called over her shoulder, not taking her eyes off James. The doctor arrived within minutes, a competent frontier physician who cleaned and stitched the wound while James gritted his teeth and refused to make a sound. Eliza held his hand the whole time, squeezing it whenever the pain must have been worst, and he squeezed back, his eyes never leaving her face. When it was done, Dr. Bradley pronounced him concussed but stable. "He should rest for a few days, sure," the doctor said. "No riding, no heavy work. Someone should keep an eye on him tonight, make sure he does not lose consciousness." "He will stay at the boarding house," Eliza said immediately, not caring what anyone thought. "I will watch over him myself." Mrs. Henderson, bless her, did not object. She helped Eliza get James settled in the small guest room on the first floor, and then discreetly left them alone. Eliza sat in a chair beside the bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, feeling her heart slowly resume its normal rhythm now that the immediate danger was past. "You did not have to stay," James said after a while. His eyes were closed, but she could tell he was not asleep. "I know it is not proper." I do not care about proper, she said, and realized it was true. When Tommy said you were hurt, I thought... Her voice broke. I thought I might lose you before I ever had the chance to tell you. Tell me what? He asked, opening his eyes to look at her. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. That I love you. I know it is too soon. I know I should be more cautious, but I cannot help it. I love you, Hollis. I think I have loved you since that first day in the rain. His hand reached out and caught hers, bringing it to his lips. Eliza, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have loved you from that moment too. I tried to fight it, tried to take things slow so I would not scare you off, but the truth is I fell hard and fast, and I have been lost ever since. You smelled like cedar and rain when we met, and I have never recovered from either. Every time it rains, I think of you. Every time I smell the cedars around my ranch, I think of you. You are in everything now, woven into my life so deeply I cannot imagine it without you. Tears were streaming down her face, but they were good tears, healing tears. I was so afraid, she whispered. After what happened in Philadelphia, I swore I would never trust another man. Never risk my heart again. But you are nothing like him. You are honest and good and true, and I was a fool to try to protect myself from something this wonderful. Tell me about Philadelphia, he said gently. Tell me what he did to you. So she did. She told him about Edmund Carstairs, the wealthy merchant's son who had courted her with eloquent words and expensive gifts, who had promised her marriage and then tried to seduce her, who had spread lies about her when she refused him, nearly destroying her reputation and her position as a governess. She told him about the whispers and the sidelong glances, about the way former friends had turned away from her on the street, about the desperation that had driven her to answer an advertisement for a teaching position 2,000 miles away. James listened in silence, his jaw tight with anger, his hand gripping hers as if he could somehow absorb her pain. When she was done, he pulled her down to sit on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around her. I am sorry, he said fiercely. I am sorry that happened to you. But I am glad you came here, glad you found your way to Cheyenne, to me. And I swear to you, Eliza, I will never give you cause to doubt me. I will never lie to you or hurt you or treat you with anything less than the respect and love you deserve. She believed him. God help her. She believed every word. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other, and Eliza felt something shift inside her, some final wall crumbling away. She had been so afraid of being hurt again, so determined to protect herself, that she had nearly missed this chance at happiness, but no more. She would not let fear rule her life. She would take this risk, trust this man, and pray that her instincts were right. James recovered quickly, his head hard enough that the concussion was mild. Within a few days, he was back to his usual self, though Eliza made him promise to be more careful around skittish horses. Their courtship continued, but there was a new openness between them now, a deeper intimacy born of shared vulnerability. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears, and Eliza found herself trusting him in ways she had never trusted anyone. It was early September when he took her out to see his ranch for the first time. They rode in his wagon, the same one he had used to take her to the boarding house that first day, and Eliza felt a sense of rightness as they traveled north through the rolling prairie. The ranch, when they reached it, was more beautiful than she had imagined. The house was modest but well built, constructed of logs and native stone with a wide porch that looked out over the creek, and all around it, just as he had said, were cedar trees, their branches spreading green and fragrant in the late summer air. This is where I smelled it that day, Eliza said, breathing in the scent of cedar mixed with the clean smell of the creek. When I got off the stagecoach and thought I was smelling the town, it was you carrying this scent with you. And you brought the rain, James said, coming to stand beside her. You brought softness and life to this hard, dry place. You brought hope to a man who had forgotten what it felt like. He took her hand and led her to a stand of cedar trees near the creek, and there, under the spreading branches, he got down on one knee. "Eliza Monroe," he said, looking up at her with those amber eyes full of love and longing. "I know we have not known each other long, but out here time moves differently. Life is too uncertain to waste. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a rough cowboy who probably does not deserve you but will spend every day trying to be worthy of you anyway?" She did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Hollis. I love you, and I want to build a life with you here, among the cedars beside this creek. I want to wake up every morning smelling cedar and rain and knowing that I am home." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed a kiss could be, tender and fierce and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers and laughed, a sound of pure joy. "When?" he asked her. "How soon can we be married? I do not want to wait." "As soon as possible," she said, surprising herself with her eagerness. "There is no reason to wait. I am sure of this, sure of you. Let us not waste any more time." They were married 3 weeks later, on a golden October day when the cottonwoods along the creek had turned to flame and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. The ceremony took place in the small church in Cheyenne, with half the town in attendance. Eliza wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Henderson and several other ladies had helped her sew, and James wore a new suit that looked almost uncomfortable on his large frame, though the happiness in his eyes more than made up for any awkwardness. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them man and wife, James kissed Eliza with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance were seen wiping their eyes. There was a reception afterward in the community hall, with food and music and dancing, and Eliza felt surrounded by love and community in a way she had never experienced in Philadelphia. These frontier people, rough as they might be, had taken her in and made her one of their own, and she knew she had found where she truly belonged. That night James took her home to the ranch, to the house among the cedars that would now be her home too. He carried her over the threshold with a grin, and she laughed at the traditional gesture even as she wrapped her arms around his neck and held him close. He set her down gently in the front room, and they stood there for a moment, suddenly shy with each other now that they were alone and married. "I want you to be happy here," James said, his hands at her waist. "I know it is not fancy like what you might have had back east, but it is solid and good. And I built most of it with my own hands. I will add on to it as we need, make it bigger, make it whatever you want it to be." "It is perfect," Eliza said, and meant it. "It smells like cedar, like you, like home. I do not need anything fancy, Hollis. I just need you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt her body respond in ways that were both thrilling and a little frightening. She was innocent still, knew only what other women had whispered to her, but she trusted James completely. When he lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bedroom, she went willingly, ready to begin this new chapter of their lives together. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches. James was patient with her nervousness, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when they finally came together as man and wife, Eliza felt a completion she had never known existed, a sense of being wholly known and wholly loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart and the sound of rain beginning to fall on the roof. "Rain," she murmured drowsily, "like the day we met." "Cedar and rain," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "The two things I will never recover from. The two things that brought you to me and changed my life forever." She fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer and more loved than she had ever felt in her life, and dreamed of a future full of promise. The first year of their marriage was not easy, but it was good. Eliza continued teaching for a while, riding into town 3 days a week to work with the students, but as winter set in and the roads became difficult, she found herself spending more time at the ranch. She discovered that she loved the life there, loved the rhythm of the days, the quiet beauty of the prairie, the satisfaction of helping James with the work. She learned to cook over a wood stove, to churn butter, to tend the vegetable garden she planted in the spring. It was harder physical work than she had ever done, but it was honest work, and she found it deeply fulfilling. James was everything she had hoped he would be as a husband: kind, attentive, faithful. He worked long hours, especially during calving season and roundup, but he always made time for her, always made her feel that she was the most important part of his life. They talked endlessly, sharing their days, their thoughts, their dreams. They read together in the evenings, James improving his literacy with her patient help, and she delighted in watching his mind expand as he discovered the world of books. They made love often, learning each other's bodies, growing more confident and adventurous. Eliza discovered that she had a passionate nature she had never suspected, and James seemed to revel in unlocking it. There was something intensely satisfying about the physical side of their marriage, a connection that went beyond words and bound them together in the most intimate way possible. By spring, Eliza knew she was pregnant. She had suspected it for a few weeks, but she wanted to be certain before she told James. When she finally shared the news one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms with a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the nearest neighbor 5 miles away, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands cradling her face. "We are really going to have a baby?" "We are," she said, laughing at his expression, "in late October or early November, if I have counted correctly. Are you happy?" "Happy?" he repeated. "Eliza, I am over the moon. I am going to be a father. We are going to be a family." He kissed her then, a kiss full of wonder and joy and love. "I will take care of you," he promised. "Both of you. I will make sure you have everything you need." He was true to his word. As her pregnancy progressed, James fussed over her in ways that were both endearing and sometimes exasperating. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, brought her little treats from town, ribbons, candy, books. He talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the land, promising to teach him or her to ride and rope and love the prairie as he did. Eliza had never felt so cherished. Her body changed, growing round with the child, and she found that she loved the evidence of the life growing inside her. She felt beautiful despite her swollen ankles and the awkwardness of her movements, because James looked at her as if she were the most gorgeous creature he had ever seen. It was a difficult birth when her time came. The baby was big, taking after his father in size, and the labor went on for nearly 20 hours. Dr. Bradley came out from town, along with Mrs. Henderson and 2 other experienced women, and they all worked to bring the child safely into the world. James paced the front room like a caged animal, unable to bear being apart from Eliza, but unable to help her either. He could hear her cries of pain through the bedroom door, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. But finally, just as dawn was breaking on a cold November morning, the baby came. His first cry was loud and lusty, and Dr. Bradley appeared in the doorway with a grin. "You have a son," he said, "a big, healthy boy. And your wife is exhausted but fine. You can go in now." James was through the door in an instant. Eliza lay in the bed, pale and tired, but with a radiant smile on her face. In her arms was a red-faced, squalling infant with a shock of dark hair and lungs that suggested he would have no trouble making himself heard. "Meet your son," she said softly, holding the baby out to James. He took the child carefully, awed by how tiny the baby seemed despite his size, by the perfect miniature fingers and toes, by the absolute miracle of this new life. "He is beautiful," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "He is perfect. "You are amazing, Eliza. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas James Holloway, after James's father and in honor of the young boy who had run to fetch Eliza when James was injured. They called him Tommy, and he was the joy of their lives. He was a healthy, happy baby who grew quickly and showed early signs of his father's sturdy build and his mother's intelligent eyes. Eliza gave up teaching to focus on caring for Tommy and the household, and she found that she did not miss it as much as she had thought she might. Her life was full and rich, and she loved being a mother, loved watching her son grow and change every day. James was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with Tommy, teaching him about the world even when the baby was too young to understand. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler and then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere, imitating his walk and his gestures and his love for the land. When Tommy was 3, Eliza became pregnant again, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Sarah after Eliza's mother. Sarah was smaller than Tommy had been, with her mother's delicate features and her father's amber eyes, and she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The ranch prospered as the years went by. James's hard work and careful management paid off, and they were able to expand their herd, buy more land, improve the house. They added 2 more rooms, a proper parlor, and a study where Eliza could keep her books and James could manage the ranch accounts. They built a barn and a bunkhouse for the hands they eventually hired to help with the work. The place began to look like a real homestead, solid and permanent, a legacy to pass on to their children. Eliza sometimes thought about how different her life might have been if she had never left Philadelphia, if she had never answered that advertisement for a school teacher in far-off Cheyenne. She might have eventually found another position as a governess, might have lived a safe, quiet, respectable life. But she would never have known this kind of happiness, this sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. She would never have known James, never have felt the depth of love that existed between them, never have built this life that was harder but infinitely more rewarding than anything she could have imagined. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James took her on a picnic to the stand of cedars where he had proposed. The children stayed with Mrs. Henderson for the afternoon, giving them a rare few hours alone together. They spread a blanket under the trees, ate the lunch Eliza had packed, and then lay back to look up at the sky through the branches. "Do you remember what I said to you that day at the social?" James asked, lacing his fingers through hers. "About how you smelled like cedar and rain when we met?" "I remember," Eliza said. "I think about it often. It was the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I meant every word," he said, rolling onto his side to look at her, "and it is still true. I have never recovered from you, Eliza. Every day I love you more than the day before. Every day I wake up grateful that you took a chance on me, that you were brave enough to trust again after what happened to you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." Tears pricked at her eyes. "You do deserve me," she said fiercely. "You deserve all the love I have to give and more. You have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. You have given me a home, a family, a life that is richer and fuller than anything I could have imagined. I love you, Hollis. I will always love you." He kissed her then, under the cedars, with the scent of the trees all around them and the sound of the creek babbling nearby. It was a perfect moment, one of many they would share over the years to come. As their children grew, Eliza and James worked together to build not just a ranch, but a real community. They helped establish a proper school building in Cheyenne, donating money and materials, and Eliza served on the school board for many years. They opened their home to neighbors, hosting gatherings and celebrations, becoming known for their hospitality and generosity. James served as a volunteer with the Territorial Marshal's office, helping to keep the peace in a region that was still rough and sometimes lawless. Tommy grew into a tall, strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He had his mother's intelligence and his father's work ethic, and it was clear from an early age that he would take over the ranch someday. Sarah was more bookish, with a quick wit and a love of learning that reminded James of Eliza. She talked about becoming a teacher like her mother, or maybe even going to college back east. And though the thought of her leaving made both her parents' hearts ache, they supported her dreams. When Eliza was 32, she gave birth to their third child, another son they named Daniel. He was a surprise, coming 8 years after Sarah, but a welcome one. Daniel had his own personality from the start, quieter than Tommy but more adventurous than Sarah, with a gift for working with horses that amazed everyone. He seemed to have an almost magical ability to gentle even the most skittish animals, and James predicted that he would be the one to establish a breeding program that would make the Holloway Ranch famous throughout the territory. The years were not without their challenges. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to the cold, dry summers when the creek ran low and the grass turned brown. There were injuries and illnesses, near misses and close calls. One year, a prairie fire swept across the land, and they barely managed to save the house and barns. Another year, rustlers took off with nearly a quarter of their herd, and James and several neighbors had to track them down, an endeavor that took 3 weeks and nearly ended in violence. But through it all, Eliza and James faced everything together. Their love, far from fading with time, only grew deeper and stronger. They had built something real and lasting, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and a passion that never dimmed. Even after 15 years of marriage, James could still make Eliza blush with a look, and she could still make his heart race when she smiled at him across the dinner table. One evening when Eliza was 39 and James was 41, they sat on the porch as they so often did, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The children were inside, Tommy helping the younger ones with their schoolwork, and for a moment it was just the two of them. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked suddenly. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming out here, marrying a cowboy instead of some educated Eastern gentleman?" Eliza looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "Why would you even ask such a thing?" He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "I was in town today, talking to that new banker from Boston. He is educated, well-spoken, wealthy. He was asking about you, about whether you ever miss the cultural advantages of city life. It made me think about what you gave up to be here with me." "I gave up nothing of value," Eliza said, moving closer to him on the bench, taking his hand. "That life was killing me, Hollis. I was suffocating under the weight of propriety and pretense. Here, I can breathe. Here, I can be myself. And I would not trade what we have for all the opera houses and museums in the world. You are my home. This ranch, our children, this life. It is everything I ever wanted, even before I knew I wanted it." "You smelled like cedar and rain when we met," he said softly, repeating the words that had become almost a litany between them over the years. "And I have never recovered from either." "Neither have I," she whispered. "Every time it rains, I think of that first day standing in the mud wondering what I had gotten myself into. Every time I smell these cedars, I think of how lucky I am that you found me, that you loved me enough to take a chance on a scared woman running from her past. We were both broken in our own ways, Hollis, but we healed each other. We built something beautiful together." He pulled her close, and they sat like that as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The sound of their children's voices drifted out through the open windows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was a perfect moment, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, the kind of moment that made up a life. As the years continued to pass, Eliza and James watched their children grow into adults. Tommy took on more and more responsibility at the ranch, proving himself to be as capable a rancher as his father. At 21, he married a sweet-natured girl named Catherine, who was the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and 2 years later they gave Eliza and James their first grandchild, a little girl named Emma. The joy of holding that baby, of seeing their son become a father, was almost overwhelming. Sarah did indeed go east to college, attending a women's seminary in Massachusetts, and though her parents missed her terribly, they were immensely proud of her accomplishments. She came home after graduation to teach at the school in Cheyenne, and eventually married a young lawyer who had moved to Wyoming to practice. They built a house in town, and Sarah continued teaching while also raising 3 children of her own. Daniel stayed at the ranch working alongside his father and brother, and proved James's prediction right by developing a breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in the territory. He was in no hurry to marry, claiming that horses were less complicated than women, but Eliza suspected he would meet the right girl eventually. By the time Eliza was 50, she and James had 6 grandchildren and another on the way. The ranch had grown to encompass over 2,000 acres with a herd of cattle that was the envy of their neighbors and a string of horses that buyers came from as far away as California to purchase. The original log house had been expanded and modified so many times that it was now a sprawling, comfortable home that could easily accommodate family gatherings. But despite all the changes and growth, some things remained constant. The stand of cedar trees still grew along the creek, their branches spreading wide and fragrant. James still carried that scent with him, a combination of the trees and the leather and sage and horse that was uniquely his. And Eliza still loved him with the same intensity she had felt that day in the rain when he had first offered her shelter. They were sitting on the porch one October evening, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, when James said, "Do you know what day it is?" "October 15th, Eliza said. "Why?" 22 years ago today we got married, he said. 22 years since the best day of my life. She smiled at him, seeing the gray in his hair and the lines that time and sun had etched into his face, and thinking that he had never looked more handsome. 22 years, she repeated. It has gone so fast. Sometimes I feel like that nervous young woman stepping off the stagecoach was someone else entirely. She was, James said. You are not that same person, and I am not the same man I was then. We have grown and changed together, shaped each other. But some things have not changed. I still love you just as much as I did that day. More, even. And you still smell like rain to me, even after all these years. Especially after all these years. Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes. After 22 years of marriage, he could still move her to tears with his words, still make her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. And you still smell like cedar, she said. My cedar tree, strong and enduring and constant, I could not have asked for a better partner in life, Hollis. You have made every day an adventure and every year a blessing. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sounds of their family, Tommy and Catherine putting their children to bed, Daniel playing his guitar, the comfortable noise of people who loved each other living their lives together. I was thinking, James said eventually, that maybe we should take a trip, just the 2 of us. We have worked hard for so many years, built this place up from nothing. The children are grown and settled. Tommy can manage the ranch for a few weeks. What do you say to seeing some of the country we have never had time to explore? We could go to San Francisco or maybe down to Santa Fe, take the train, stay in hotels, be tourists for a while. Eliza was surprised but pleased by the suggestion. They had rarely left the ranch for more than a day or 2 at a time, always too busy with work and children and responsibilities. The thought of having James to herself for a few weeks, of exploring new places together, was enormously appealing. I would love that, she said. When should we go? Spring, he said decisively. After calving season is done and before we need to start the summer work, we will make it our anniversary gift to each other. 23 years of marriage deserves a celebration. They went in the spring, taking the Union Pacific Railroad west to San Francisco. It was Eliza's first time on a train, and she was like a child with her face pressed to the window watching the landscape roll by. They saw mountains and deserts, forests and valleys, the vast sweep of the country that they had lived in all these years but never really seen. San Francisco was a revelation, a bustling city perched on hills overlooking the bay, full of people from all over the world, and buildings that seemed impossibly tall and grand. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants where white-clothed tables and crystal chandeliers made Eliza feel like she had stepped into another world, walked along the waterfront and through Chinatown, and up the steep streets to look out over the water. But the best part was simply being together without the demands of the ranch, without children or chores or responsibilities. They talked for hours, made love in the afternoons when the mood struck them, laughed like young lovers. James bought Eliza a silk shawl embroidered with flowers, and she bought him a leather-bound journal for writing down his observations about the ranch and their life. They saw a play at a grand theater, and though neither of them followed the plot very well, they enjoyed the spectacle and the feeling of being part of something sophisticated and cultured. After 2 weeks, they were ready to go home. San Francisco was wonderful, but it was not theirs. Their home was on the prairie, among the cedars, where the sky went on forever, and the only sounds were wind and water and cattle. They returned to the ranch in late May, and when they crested the rise that brought the house into view, Eliza felt her heart swell with love for this place that they had built together. The children and grandchildren had planned a welcome home party, and the house was full of people and laughter and food. As Eliza stood in the middle of the chaos, watching James hoist his youngest granddaughter onto his shoulders while Tommy and Daniel debated some point of ranch management, and Sarah organized the children for a game, she felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what they had built, the legacy that would outlast them, not just land and cattle and buildings, but a family rooted in love and mutual respect, a community that they had helped to shape and strengthen. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Eliza and James walked down to the creek, to the stand of cedars that had always been their special place. It was a warm night, and the stars were brilliant overhead. They stood hand in hand under the trees, breathing in the scent of cedar and listening to the water flowing over stones. "You smelled like cedar and rain when we met," James said, pulling her into his arms, "and I have never recovered from either. Every day of our life together has been a gift, Eliza. Every moment with you has been a blessing. I hope you know that." "I do know it," she said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Because I feel the same way. You saved me, Hollis. You gave me a reason to trust again, to love again, to believe in happiness. You gave me everything." They stood like that for a long time. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had stood the test of time. The wind rustled through the cedar branches, carrying that distinctive scent, and somewhere in the distance it began to rain, a soft summer shower that pattered gently on the leaves and on the water. Cedar and rain, the scents that had brought them together and bound them forever, the sense of home and love and a life well lived. As they grew older, Eliza and James settled into a comfortable rhythm. James gradually turned over more of the day-to-day management of the ranch to Tommy, though he still rode out most days to check on the cattle and the land. His body was not as strong as it had once been, his joints stiff in the mornings, but his spirit was undiminished. He loved the work, loved the land, and could not imagine a life that did not involve the ranch. Eliza spent her days tending her garden, which had grown over the years into an impressive affair with vegetables and herbs and flowers that provided beauty and sustenance. She wrote letters to friends and family, read voraciously, and doted on her growing collection of grandchildren. She also began writing down the story of their life, wanting to preserve it for future generations, wanting her children and grandchildren to understand the journey that had brought Eliza and James together. She wrote about Philadelphia and the pain that had driven her west. She wrote about that rainy day in Cheyenne when a kind cowboy had offered her shelter. She wrote about falling in love, about the courage it had taken to trust again, about building a life and a family on the frontier. And she wrote about the scent of cedar and rain, about how those two simple things had become the symbols of their love, the threads that wove through their entire story. When she showed the manuscript to James, he read it with tears in his eyes. "This is beautiful," he said when he finished. "This is our legacy, Eliza. Not just the ranch or the land, but this story. The story of how love can heal, how trust can be rebuilt, how two broken people can make each other whole. They were both in their 60s when James's health began to decline. It started with a persistent cough that he brushed off as nothing, but which gradually worsened. Dr. Bradley, now elderly himself, diagnosed a weakness in his lungs, possibly from years of exposure to dust and cold and the harsh conditions of ranch life. There was little to be done except rest and try to stay warm and healthy. And James followed the doctor's orders as well as he could, though it chafed at him to be limited. Eliza nursed him through that winter with the same fierce devotion she had shown in every aspect of their life together. She made sure he ate well, that he stayed warm, that he did not overexert himself. She read to him in the evenings and held his hand through the nights when the coughing kept him awake, and she prayed harder than she had ever prayed for anything, that she would not lose him, that they would have more time together. Spring came, and James rallied, his health improving with the warmer weather. By summer he was back to his usual self, though Eliza and the children insisted he take things easier. He grumbled about being treated like an invalid, but he also seemed to appreciate the care, the reminder of how much he was loved. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in October of 1903 with a grand party at the ranch. All three of their children were there with their families, and the house and yard were full of grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate with them, and the festivities lasted all day and into the night. At one point, James stood up to make a speech, and the crowd quieted to listen. 40 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I married the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. I was a rough cowboy with calloused hands and not much education, and she was a cultured lady from Philadelphia with more learning in her little finger than I had in my whole body. But somehow, we made it work. We built a life together, raised wonderful children, created something lasting and good. And I want everyone here to know that I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Eliza, you smelled like cedar and rain when we met, and I have never recovered from either. I never will. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as James raised his glass in a toast, and Eliza stood to join him, her own eyes bright with tears. And I love you, she said, her voice clear and strong. You gave me everything that matters, love, family, purpose, home. You are my cedar tree, my constant shelter in every storm. Here is to 40 years and to whatever time we have left together. They had 5 more good years, years of watching grandchildren grow, of sitting on the porch in the evenings, of holding hands and stealing kisses like young lovers, years of contentment and peace, of knowing they had lived well and loved deeply. The ranch continued to prosper under Tommy's management, and they had the satisfaction of seeing their life's work continue into the next generation. It was a cold November night in 1908 when James woke Eliza in the small hours, his breathing labored, his skin clammy with sweat. She knew immediately that this was serious, that this was what they had both been dreading. She sent Daniel racing for the doctor, but even as she held James and whispered reassurances, she knew it was too late. Do not leave me, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, Hollis, do not leave me. I am not ready. I will never be ready. Shh, he said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with a tenderness that broke her heart. You are the strongest person I know. You will be fine. You have our children, our grandchildren. You have this place we built together. You will be fine. I do not want to be fine without you, she sobbed. I want you. I need you. You will always have me, he said, his voice fading. Every time you smell cedar, every time it rains, I will be there with you, Eliza, always. I love you. You smelled like cedar and rain when we met, and I have never recovered from either. I never wanted to recover. Loving you was the best thing I ever did. Those were his last words. He died in her arms as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Eliza felt as if a part of her soul had been torn away. She held him and wept until there were no more tears, until the children arrived and gently pried her away so they could prepare his body for burial. They buried James Holloway in a small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading cedar tree that he had planted himself years earlier. Half the county came to the funeral, paying their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Eliza stood dry-eyed through the service, her children around her, and when the last prayer had been said and the last handful of dirt thrown on the coffin, she stayed behind after everyone else had left. She stood under the cedar tree, breathing in that familiar scent, and talked to James as if he were still there. She told him about the service, about how many people had come, about how much he had been loved. She told him that she would miss him every day for the rest of her life, that a world without him seemed colorless and cold, and she promised him that she would live on, for their children and grandchildren, that she would honor his memory by continuing to love the ranch and the life they had built together. It began to rain as she stood there, a cold November rain that soaked through her black mourning dress, and Eliza tilted her face up to the sky and let it wash over her. Cedar and rain, the scents that defined her life, that would always remind her of the greatest love she had ever known. She lived another 12 years without him, years that were both harder and easier than she had expected, harder because the loneliness was sometimes overwhelming, because she would turn to share something with James and remember with fresh pain that he was gone. Easier because he had given her so much, so many years of happiness and love, so many memories to sustain her, such a strong foundation to stand on. She watched her grandchildren grow into adults, saw several of them marry and start families of their own. She held great-great-grandchildren in her arms and marveled at the fact that she and James had created this sprawling family tree, all from the love that had begun on a rainy day in Cheyenne so many years ago. She saw the ranch continue to prosper, saw new buildings go up and new generations take over the work, and she knew that what they had built would endure. She spent her final years living in the house among the cedars, surrounded by family, tending her garden, and writing in her journal. She added to the manuscript about her life with James, wanting to capture every memory, every moment, every reason why their love had been so special. And on quiet evenings, she would walk down to the creek, to the stand of cedars where James had proposed, and she would talk to him, feeling his presence all around her. Eliza Monroe Holloway died peacefully in her sleep on a rainy April night in 1920, at the age of 76. Her children found her in the morning, a slight smile on her face, her hands folded peacefully over her chest. On the bedside table was her journal, open to the last entry she had written. "I am ready to go now," it read. "I have lived a long and blessed life, full of more love and happiness than any one person deserves. I have watched my children grow and thrive, have held my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, have seen the ranch prosper beyond anything Hollis and I dreamed of in those early years, but I miss him. I have missed him every day since he left me, and I'm ready to be with him again. I wonder if heaven smells like cedar and rain. I hope it does. I hope he's waiting for me there, my cowboy, my love, my home. We never recovered from each other, Hollis and I. We never wanted to, and soon, very soon, we will be together again forever this time, with no more partings. Until then, my loves, remember us. Remember that love can conquer distance and doubt and fear. Remember that two broken people can heal each other and build something beautiful. And remember that the greatest adventure of all is finding the person who makes you whole. Cedar and rain. That is what I will remember. That is what I will carry with me into eternity." They buried Eliza next to James, under the spreading cedar tree on the hill overlooking the ranch. It was raining the day of her funeral, a soft spring rain that made everything smell fresh and clean, and everyone agreed that it was fitting. The whole county came to pay their respects to a woman who had been a teacher, a wife, a mother, a pillar of the community, and a living legend. Tommy stood at the graveside, now a man of 62 with grandchildren of his own, and read from his mother's journal. He read about the day she arrived in Cheyenne, scared and alone, and how a kind cowboy had changed her life forever. He read about the love that had grown between them, deep and true and lasting. And he read the words that his father had spoken so many times, the words that had become the touchstone of their relationship. You smelled like cedar and rain when we met, and I have never recovered from either. The words hung in the rain-soaked air, and there was not a person present who was not moved by them. They all knew the story, had heard it countless times over the years, but it never lost its power. It was a reminder that true love existed, that it could endure hardship and heartbreak and the passage of time, that it could create something lasting and beautiful. As the mourners dispersed, slowly making their way down the hill to the ranch house where a meal had been prepared, a single cedar branch fell from the tree, landing gently on the fresh grave, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled, followed by a harder burst of rain as if the heavens themselves were weeping. But it was not sad, not really, because Eliza and James were together again, reunited at last after 12 long years apart. And in the ranch house below, surrounded by the family they had created, their legacy lived on. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all carrying pieces of them forward into the future. The ranch they had built still stood, still prospered, a testament to their hard work and vision. And the story of their love, written down in Eliza's careful hand, was preserved for all the generations to come. Years later, Tommy's daughter, Emma, named after the little girl who had been the first grandchild, published her grandmother's manuscript. It became a beloved book, read by people all over the country who were moved by the story of a scared woman from Philadelphia and a rough cowboy from Wyoming who had found each other and built an extraordinary life together. Readers wrote letters saying the story had inspired them, had given them hope, had reminded them of what really mattered in life. The ranch remained in the Holloway family for generations, each one adding to it, improving it, but always maintaining the original house among the cedars. It became a tradition for newlyweds in the family to be photographed under the cedar tree on the hill, standing between the graves of James and Eliza, paying homage to the love that had started it all. And on rainy days when the air was thick with moisture and the cedars released their fragrance into the wind, the people who lived at the ranch swore they could feel a presence, a sense of peace and love that pervaded the whole place. Some said it was just imagination, the power of suggestion. But others knew better. They knew that some loves are so strong they transcend death, that some bonds are so deep they can never truly be broken. James and Eliza Holloway had found each other against all odds in a rough frontier town on a rainy June day in 1878. They had built a life together that was rich and full and meaningful. They had loved each other with a depth and constancy that was rare in any era. And though their physical bodies had long since returned to the earth, their love lived on, written in the journals that preserved their story, carved into the headstones on the hill, woven into the very fabric of the ranch they had built together. Cedar and rain. Two simple things that had become so much more, that had become the symbols of a love that had endured everything life could throw at it. A love that had never recovered and never wanted to. A love that would last forever, in this world and the next, as eternal as the cedars that still grew along the creek and the rain that still fell on the Wyoming plains. And somewhere, in some place beyond mortal understanding, a cowboy held a woman in his arms, breathing in the scent of rain while she breathed in the scent of cedar, and they smiled at each other with the perfect contentment of two souls who had finally irrevocably come home.